When is the last time you received some really good critical feedback on things you could improve? Second question, when's the last time you gave really good critical feedback to somebody to help them improve? As humans, feedback is something that we suck at. And today we're going to look at the reasons why. All right, welcome back to the Operator's Mind, everybody. My name is Trey. Most of the community know me as Mr. Free. And today we're going to talk everything feedback. Now, why is feedback so important? Every single one of us has blind spots in our behavior. Every single one of us. And those blind spots remain blind, meaning out of our vision, because we don't have feedback mechanisms coming in to reveal those blind spots to us. Meaning if we're not effective in some of the ways that we're behaving, we just keep doing it over and over because our internal feedback machine doesn't see a problem with it. That's why they're blind spots. So what feedback can allow us to do is fill in those gaps, fill in our blind spots, so we kind of have a 360 view of ourselves and our behavior, and it can allow us to be more effective in more arenas regardless of what our job is. So the question to you is, why is it so hard for you to give and receive feedback? Now, there's probably some of you saying, I don't have a problem with giving feedback or taking feedback. And that is true. From my experience, after watching thousands of people go through our process and many other processes like it, some people are naturally drawn to accepting critical feedback and trying to use it to get better. However, a large part of the populace is not inclined that way. Now, what causes us to react the way we do to critical feedback? That's a deep subject, and I'm not a psychologist by any means, but I have studied this for a long time, and I've watched it in human behavior for a long time, and I've been on a journey of self-awareness for over a decade to where I'm trying to root out the reasons why that I personally never liked critical feedback. I saw it as a threat instead of a gift. The reason why? Our egos. Since we were young, we've been building this story of us in our head. And that story is basically our ego. And the ego wants to protect that story at all costs. Or if we're getting feedback that's telling us that that story is not necessarily the perfect model that we think it is, the ego doesn't like it, and we want to rebel against it. Now, how do we know that this is happening? When you get critical feedback from somebody, if you can become self-aware to understand what is your initial reaction, what emotions are created almost instantly when somebody gives you critical feedback. Some of us give excuses. Some of us go right into our excuse matrix of why that happened and why they're wrong and our story is still sound. Others just don't believe it. We believe that the other person giving us feedback is as flawed as us or as biased as us, and we're not willing to listen to their critique because they aren't us. They haven't lived our experiences. So what would be really helpful for you, for each of us, when we receive some kind of critical feedback, just to take a moment, pause, and become self-aware and say, how am I reacting to that right now? Now, if you're like me and had strong visceral responses back before I even realized what was happening, I probably couldn't have seen it in the moment. Yet what I'm asking you to do now is, even if you have to reflect on it later, which is also good, I want you to scale out what you think that response was. From a 1, low emotion, enjoy getting the critical feedback, want more of it, to 10, my stress responses went off the chart. I don't want to hear any more of it, and I see it as a threat. If you can place yourself somewhere on that continuum and understand where you fall, now you're aware enough to say, I can do something about it when I'm getting the critical feedback. One of the common themes from selection, from all the operators coming from all these outside units. So every special operations unit, ground unit from special tactics and rescue in the Air Force comes to our assessment and selection process. So I get to hear how the culture is at those places and how they give feedback, or if they give feedback. And the overwhelming consent is they don't do feedback at their units, and if they are doing it, they don't do it well. That's a scary proposition to think about. We're talking about the most elite operators in the world who don't give feedback to each other to make each other better. What are the results of that? Man, dangerous. It's dangerous to be in environments like ours to where feedback is not being given. And it just isn't given feedback. It's given good feedback. It's given feedback that's going to help them grow. Feedback that they need to hear that they won't necessarily want to hear all the time. We're really good in these units at telling each other how good we're doing. We're really bad in these units to tell each other how much we're screwing up and what we need to do to fix it. Those aren't the only concerns. So let's paint a scenario. Imagine that I went to one of the special tactics units in the Air Force, or I went out to somewhere that you work in the business world, and I convinced your whole company or your whole organization that you need to do feedback better, and everybody's bought in. Now what? The problem is we don't really understand how to give feedback or who we're giving feedback to. And I hope you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I know the people that work with me. And that's interesting because earlier I had said that our egos are the ones that create the problems for some of us in receiving feedback. Because the ego doesn't like to hear that the story it created isn't a perfect story. But let me ask you this. Who do you think you're interacting with at work? Do you think all those operators in your unit are walking around being their real selves? What you're seeing in each other is their ego. Or more specifically, their work ego. Who they feel they need to be when they walk in the doors of your organization or your unit. So now, who are we giving feedback to? And here's the danger. The only behavior I really ever get to see in most of the people surrounding me at work is the ego version of themselves. And that's okay. That's the way life is. But if I'm going to give this person feedback, do I want to reinforce the ego version of themselves, or do I want to dig down into the real version of themselves, or both? In a perfect world, I would love to build both of those personas up. But a lot of times I don't know the real person because I've only seen their ego version being played out every day. So you have to work with what they give you to work with. But if we do this right, and if we have authentic relationships inside our work environment, we should be able to get to know the person below the level of their ego in some points. That takes a lot of trust. That takes a lot of honesty and the willingness for people to be themselves. So what's the best way to give and receive feedback? Let's talk about receiving feedback first, because you control that in a way. We all need critical feedback. What you need to do in your organization or your unit, find the mentors, the exemplars, the people that are behaving the way that you want to behave, the people that value the same things that you value, and then pull them aside and ask them for critical feedback. But hear me clearly, you have to give them permission to be critical to you. And then when they are, you have to receive that like an adult. You can't be defensive or fight back, because then that's going to make them not give you feedback anymore. And this is tough. We're humans. I already told you our ego doesn't like to be told that it's screwing up. But this is the only way we can grow. We cannot fill in our blind spots of behavior without the help of these people. So once again, go find some exemplars, some mentors. Give them full permission to give you critical feedback at any time that it's warranted. And then when they give it to you, receive it gracefully and thank them at the end of it. And maybe even repeat back to them what they told you, just so the two-way communication is clear and they understand that you heard the message clearly. Now, how do we give feedback effectively? This is not as easy as just telling people how they screwed up, because not only are we talking to their ego, we are talking through our ego. And man, if I could reach in you and turn the switch off, the ego switch off, and have you give them feedback from your true self, then there would be no worries, because you'd be focused on exactly what you should be focused on. However, that ego switch isn't available. So you will be giving them feedback through the perspective of your ego. And you have to be careful with that, because egos want to create other versions of themselves, not better versions of other egos. What are you talking about, Mr. Free? So here's how it works. Our egos want to create clones of us, meaning when we give feedback to others, we usually give feedback from our perspective saying, hey, you need to tweak this way. And then if I'm an outside observer and I hear you say that, what I'm going to hear you say is you trying to turn them into you. And that's not what we're trying to do with feedback, folks. Sure, you can use lessons learned and experiences from your past, but the responsibility of you as the person giving feedback is you need to know that person well enough to where you're shaping that feedback to make them a better version of them, not you. The world already has you. We don't need another you. We need a better version of them. That's the point of feedback. So the art of giving good feedback is understanding the person you're giving it to, what they need to correct or improve upon, and how to shape that message so they can hear it and become a better version of them, not just mimic what you do. Now, one way that we shape this message at our work, and shout out to a couple of past psych docs that were there that gave me these tools to use, is we use start, stop, continue. This is a very easy way to give somebody critical feedback. And it goes like this. The start. You tell them you need to start doing this to be more effective. You need to stop doing this to be more effective. And you need to continue doing this to be effective. So in that message, we gave them things they need to start doing that might be their blind spots, stop doing that also might be in their blind spots, and continue doing the things that we value in their behavior that we think are leading to their success. So let's recap real quick just the big wave tops. So our ego usually doesn't like feedback because feedback is telling it that the story it's creating and projecting into the world isn't perfect. We all respond to critical feedback differently. Some of us, it isn't that big of a deal. On our scale, that was the 1. They don't mind critical feedback. They ask for critical feedback, and when you give it to them, they accept it readily, and then you see them trying to improve. And then the other people, me 10 years ago, hates critical feedback, threat to my ego. I think less of you because you gave me the critical feedback, and I'm not going to change. We all exist somewhere between that 1 and the 10. So when you get critical feedback in the future, hopefully you can be self-aware enough to figure out where am I on that scale. And then wherever I am, I should do things to try to make me move down towards the 1, to where it doesn't bother me. I request it, I need the critical feedback, and I want to grow from it. We have to see feedback as a gift, not a threat. As long as feedback is a threat to you, you will not grow at the level that you should. And especially special operations units, we need units filled with growth mindset, not people who are stuck in their ways and won't change. We often give people feedback to make them more of a version of us instead of a better version of them. So the goal here that we discussed today is you need to understand that person intimately to where you can take whatever areas of improvement they need to make them a better version of them, not a version of you. We already have you. You want them to be a better version of them. And last but not least, just a good method that you can use is that start, stop, continue. This is what you need to stop doing to be more effective. This is what you need to start doing to be more effective. And this is what you need to continue doing because you're effective in these areas. Just a simple model to use to give each other critical feedback. And last but not least, find some mentors or some exemplars who have the same values you do, whose behavior you think matches what you want to be or move towards, and then ask them for critical feedback. Give them permission to give you critical feedback when they see that you need it, and when they give it to you, be accepting, be grateful, and let them see that you are trying to make those improvements. All right, y'all, that's it for another week. Down in the description, there's a link to our Operator's Mind Substack. If you're not reading that Substack every week, you're missing out. This week and last week, we talked about the streetlight effect. If you don't know what that is, you are missing out. Click on the link, subscribe to the Substack, it's free, and go read. All right, y'all, have a good week.